Hello, and welcome to lecture number 1 for Mesopotamia and Egypt. You may be asking yourself, why study Mesopotamia? And you might be asking, where is Mesopotamia? And those are both good questions. In the Middle East, over 10,000 years ago, an area that is largely desert, was a fertile river valley where we believe that civilization may have begun. Let's look at the globe today and take a look of where exactly we're talking about. Zooming in to this area, you can see water through here still kind of in the same place as we saw on the map before. Like I said, today this is largely desert, but the kingdom of Assyria lends its name to the country of Syria today, and history has continued through that area for thousands of years. It's believed that Eridu, the city right down here next to Ur, may have been the first city about 4000 BCE. For our purposes, our interest in this as theater practitioners, as designers, as teachers and directors, is that there is a large amount of content and a large number of play scripts that take place in this area at this time, but you probably don't know them as Mesopotamia. You're probably thinking about them as biblical. And all of these kingdoms we're going to study in general as a snapshot, but they had distinct cultures and distinct time periods and interactions with each other as well. But for us, if you're going to be working on a production of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, or Children of Eden, or if you're going to be working for a church on the large number of passion plays and pageants that get produced, then it's very important that you have an understanding of the general idea of the shapes of a lot of these buildings and clothes and things like that. And a lot of us, when we think back in history to as far as we can, we may think about Egypt or Greece and Rome, but Babylon and Sumeria and all of these places were thriving, complex civilizations that influenced those civilizations a lot. We'll start at the lowest economic level, or the simplest of things. The people at the bottom may have lived in structures that were made out of plated reeds. Plated means braided. And what you see here is the structural members of this building are made out of reeds, just been bound together into these shapes. And they may have lived in these homes as families or in clans. And another type of structure that was invented very early on, since the beginning of time, is a keyword for us, a vocabulary word. The word is adobe. And with adobe, from the very beginning, what adobe is mud that has been combined with straw or dung of animals for strength when it dries. And it's either been formed into walls and mounds like you see here by hand, or a little bit further on in the history of the development of adobe, it would be formed into bricks and left out in the sun to dry into hard bricks that they could make structures out of. So in Mesopotamia, that was a key. Both the plated reeds and the early use of adobe were key lower to middle class structural techniques. Excuse me. When you see a word here on the screen, that's going to be a vocabulary word for us. And there will be vocabulary sheets that I'll be issuing as well. But if you're taking notes along with this, then writing those down would be key. And the vocabulary sheets will have the definitions on them as well. So thatch is another vocabulary word for us, because you can see this building is made out of adobe bricks. You can kind of see around the door, there's a little bit of ribbing texture where you can see it's brick, and the wall behind is brick. And thatch is a roof technique using reeds or other organic material in bundles to make the roof. And it's much lighter than making a whole roof out of adobe that might fall in on you. And it's just as waterproof, and it's insulative as well. As adobe techniques go on throughout history, they become quite complex, and you can make really elaborate things. This is probably made out of adobe bricks that then they have put adobe onto the surface of, and you'll see this coming up all through history and even today. A lot of Spanish influenced structures and styles. We're going to be talking about adobe again. Cool. Another keyword for the Mesopotamians is the ziggurat. Pyramids show up throughout time in all civilizations, from Egypt, South America. Many civilizations built pyramids, and one of the first was Mesopotamia, and they had stepped tiered pyramids, kind of like a layer cake getting smaller. And they were very large, a lot of them. And they served as the base for temples that would be built on top. But you can also see there are windows in this one, probably for shooting arrows out of, or a lot of other activities would go on in these temples because they would become sort of a city center. Here's another illustration of one of the bigger ziggurats. And you can see from this image that the scale was quite massive. In Mesopotamia, the invention of a lot of things that we take for granted today, the wheel, coins and the concept of money, glazed pottery, and here's some of their other sculpture and art as well. One of the things they invented was called cuneiform. It was a very early form of writing, and they would use wedge-shaped styluses to press these triangular marks into clay and then dry or bake the clay to give themselves a written record that would last, that they could maintain, whether it was a record of business transactions or whatever have you. Another invention was relief sculpture. So this is a relief sculpture is typically carved into a surface to remove the negative spaces, or it may be sculpted out of a wet substance like clay, but the point of relief is that it is standing out from a surface. And a sculpture like this, which is the Burney relief, also known as the Queen of Night relief, it's a terracotta plaque in high relief depicting a winged goddess-like figure with bird's talons perched upon two lions. The next image is of a low relief sculpture. And all of this type of work was very prominent in their architecture and in their interior decor. It's quite realistic. The lion, the detailing on this lion and the proportions and shape for being so long ago is excellent. If you look at the talons or the claws on his paw there. Another word is inlay. So the inlay is a concept that's going to come up throughout the rest of time. But if you cut into a surface, kind of like the relief, and you make a negative space, then if you add a second material around or into the negative spaces, you get a different color and a different texture. And so the figures here have been cut into the surface of this box and then filled in with perhaps ivory or bone to give quite a complex and high contrast color that will last forever, whereas many pigments will fade. So inlay. This is a type of stamped decor that they had and that they used, and they made these cylindrical stamps, and you could carve into them, and then you could roll them, and you could roll them as far as you want, and the more clay you roll them over, the longer of a little relief image you would get here. This is a sculpture prominent in Mesopotamian art called the lamassu. It's a celestial being bearing a human head, bull's body, sometimes with the horns and ears of a bull and wings. It appears frequently throughout all of Mesopotamian art. These square-shaped beards as well, you'll see on people, nobles, you'll see them come up a lot. Here's another lamassu. As far as their furniture goes, we don't know that much about it, only as depicted on images from pots and vessels and clay from some of their low relief. And we also know that it was similar to Egyptian furniture. These images here relate to Mesopotamian art as from what we've pulled from the pottery. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that when we talk about Egypt. Great. There was a variety of sitting things, stools and benches, and chairs were complex to make, and they were largely reserved for higher up people. But beds were also not what we think of today. The Egyptians and the Romans, and we assume the Mesopotamians, had beds for lounging on the patio, and they had separate beds for sleeping, and they had separate beds for sitting, and their perceptions about furniture were very different than ours. Frequently, just a stool of some kind would be the main sitting device. Great. These sketches are taken from pottery, so people would relief over the sketches, a relief over the pottery, and then get a line drawing like this. Cool. This is called the Ishtar Gate. I think it's one of the most beautiful things that is left over, that still exists from Mesopotamia. And it's the 8th gate to the inner city of Babylon. It's blue glazed bricks and animals in low relief. And so this was taken from Babylon, and I think it's in Berlin in a museum. And the glazing is a ceramic technique that's very much used today. If you have any pottery or your family collects pottery or anything like that, and all the different colors and things like that are painted onto it when it is baked, and then that's where the glazing comes from. It's a shiny, durable surface that is harder and makes it last longer and gives it color. So glazing was a major technique that was developed as well. One of the major fabrics that they had in Mesopotamia was felt, which is still used today. It was instead of being woven, it's a compressed or pounded wool or goat hair cloth. They also had woven wool as a primary fabric, including making their shoes out of it. And later they developed finely woven linen and cotton and silk as well. Loincloths led to wraparound skirts for men and also for women. And women would also typically have a shawl that they would wrap around their top. Men often went without early on, and then later things were developed, long sewn skirts and more elaborate shawls, lots of fringe and geometric patterns. So we can see here there was a huge development over time. This area was in development as a civilization for hundreds and hundreds of years. And as they got better at making cloth, more fabric was available. And so they went from small skirts to bigger skirts to developing sewing and creating sleeves and things like that. Lots of geometric patterns and lots of animalistic stuff as well. Here are some sculptures from Mesopotamia. The little blue in the eyes is probably lapis lazuli, which is one of the earliest and only blue pigment stones for thousands of years. Great. Fringe is one of our vocabulary words from this time period. So they were very much into fringe. It's an easy way to decorate something, and it could have been made out of strips of wool or string or fiber or strips of cut leather. It could also be made out of cutout shapes, as we see here in this image. Here is a king or nobleman. This to me looks very much like it could be from a Bible play or something like that. And here's a variety of statues. And so you can see quite a variety of the clothing shapes and styles that were available. Long skirts, no pants, different fringes, some large cutout shapes, lots of different shawls and wraps. And the facial hair and the hair also is very interesting and noteworthy. So here's our vocabulary words that, well, like I said, also will be available in a document because I'm in front of them right now, so don't worry about that. But here's our words: adobe, thatch, ziggurat, cuneiform, relief, inlay, the Ishtar gate, felt, fringe. Great. Now let's move on and talk a little bit about Egypt. So Egypt was a civilization from roughly 3000 BC, and it faded out over a really long time period. Of course, people still live in Egypt today, but the kingdoms of Egypt had completely faded out by 500 CE. In Egypt, the central thing to know about, of course, is the Nile River, and all of the cities and temples and everything that we're going to talk about existed along the Nile, because the Nile, like the Tigris and Euphrates, was key to agriculture, and of course, food is key to civilization and to cities. One of our vocabulary words for Egypt is post and lintel. This is a very simple concept, and it's the key to all architecture throughout all of time. The Babylonians and Mesopotamians also had post and lintel. And what it is at the most basic, if you stick two things in the ground near each other and you put something across them at the top, you've invented the arch. And the arch is where the word architecture comes from. The whole point of all of this throughout time was to get something over our heads and get us out of the rain. So architecture is the creation of different types of arches, and that's what we're going to be talking a lot about in this whole class. Post and lintel is the most basic method. You can take wooden posts and stick them in the ground. You can build stone like this. Stonehenge is post and lintel. This is post and lintel. It's the most basic way to make an inside from the outside. And the Egyptians used post and lintel at a variety of levels of detail and complexity. This is an interior made out of post and lintel, so you have your vertical posts, your lintels going across them, and then more lintels going across them the other way, creating an elaborate interior One of the weaknesses of this, of course, is that your interiors have to have a lot of columns because you're limited in how far you can span to the brittleness of your material. So regular Egyptians lived in smaller domiciles made out of post and lintel construction using adobe bricks and adobe surfacing techniques to fill it out. The inside of a regular Egyptian's house might look like this. It might have been stone. It probably had simple furniture and a fire. But this is a civilized dwelling. They have a stone floor. They have a centralized limited fire area. Whereas the higher level Egyptians would live in much more elaborate settings. Great. Your average Egyptian town or city might look like this. A lot of adobe bricks and post and lintel construction. Here's an image of a larger city, mostly constructed of stone. I think this is a model, which is very cool. And their construction of adobe bricks and stone and post and lintel also involved much, much larger structures. Their religious practice was very, very central to their civilization, and so their temples became huge and incredibly decorative, and we're going to go on to talk about those as well. In the popular imagination, Egypt is seen as mysterious, magical, and that's because their religion was so central, and it informed and dictated a lot of their actions. And a lot of it was mysterious for a long time because we didn't understand their writing, and we didn't understand a lot of what we saw coming out of them. Why would you build pyramids or obelisks or sphinxes? Here is a very interesting, unusual stepped pyramid in Egypt that next to it, these structures are also just as old. They were the burial preparation areas for this pyramid, which was used as a tomb. And here we see the temple at Luxor, which was just another form of, or another instance of stone construction. But of course, the big thing that we all think about immediately when we say Egypt is the pyramids. And the pyramids, these are the Great Pyramids at Giza. The pyramids were tombs for the pharaohs. And there were smaller pyramids for various noblemen and other people that were important people. The pyramids were built in order to get you closer to heaven. And the idea was that from the top of the pyramid, you could go up to the heavens and make your transportation easier that way. The Sphinx was a mythical creature with the head of a human, a falcon, a cat, or a sheep, and the body of a lion with the wings of an eagle. It represents Ra, the powerful sun god, and is the incarnation of royal power and the protector of the temple doors. So you would see sphinxes near the pyramids as they would protect the tomb. Here's some smaller sphinxes at the Temple of Luxor. An obelisk was a stone rectangular pillar with a tapered top, set on a base, and erected to commemorate an individual or an event. So an obelisk was like a monument to something or somebody. The Washington Monument is the same shape, taken and inspired by the Egyptians. And there are many other obelisks throughout the country and the world as well. This is still a very popular monument type. Here's an obelisk at Luxor. The column. You know what a column is, but you may never have thought about it as for what it does, and it has an incredible story throughout history. Of course, it's just something that came from post and lintel. The post is a column, but choosing their size and their material for your engineering needs, your functional needs, and choosing the formal or the form, the shape of it, the decorative elements of it, throughout history has been an incredibly detailed and elaborate journey. So the Egyptians had many, many types of columns, and they decorated their capitals, which the capital is the top of the column. We'll be talking a lot more about this when we get to Greece and Rome. And you can see on the column on the right here that they have carved hieroglyphics into their columns as well. And they had many, many types of capitals and decorative elements. And they were taken largely from plants. You can see palmettes here and something called anthemions that we're going to talk about when we talk about Greece and Rome. And so when we talk about Greece and Rome, and I say that there were 6 types of classical columns, the Egyptians had many, many more. And most of these would just be referred to as composite. Hieroglyphics. The Egyptians had a writing style that mesmerized us and confused us for thousands of years. They used pictograms to represent ideas, and without knowing what those pictograms individually represented, it was impossible to figure out what they had written, because the pictogram didn't just mean bird, but each one had a much larger meaning that we did not know. It wasn't until they discovered the Rosetta Stone in 1799, I believe, that they could translate it, because the Rosetta Stone had 3 languages, including Greek and hieroglyphics on it, and so they were able to figure out from that what the hieroglyphics on that said, and thereby translate everything else the Egyptians had written. The Valley of the Kings has over 500 tombs cut into the rock of the mountains. It's a valley in southern Egypt, and King Tut and many, many pharaohs and other powerful nobles of Egypt were buried here. The inside is decorated very elaborately with painted and carved low-relief sculpture and hieroglyphics telling the stories of the journeys of many of these people. It's quite beautiful, and it's one of the major resources. Here's a family on vacation. It's one of the major sources of pictographic and visual imagery that we have from Egypt. This is an image of obviously a 3D recreation of King Tut's tomb, and you can see the people carrying things down the ramps, and a pharaoh would be buried with an enormous quantity of things that they might need in the afterlife. Egyptian furniture is very mystifying. Their conceptions about how to use it and what it was for still confuse us today. But for higher class Egyptians, the things that were available to them were incredibly decorative. They featured inlay, they featured gold, gold leafing, gold foil. And they featured their own symbology, their motifs. So we're going to talk about motifs a lot in this class. A motif is a repeating pattern. So on this chest, you can see the Ankh. Right here is a Egyptian symbol for eternal life. And it's a motif in this because it repeats as a pattern. You can see inlay here. You can see gold leafing. You can see hieroglyphics. In this chair also, you can see a lot of the animal imagery and gold leafing, even the legs of the chair. This throne had claws to have animal imagery. Here's a more simple bed and more elaborate thrones. A lot of the things that we have left over from this time period all come from the high class because they were in tombs, and that's how they were protected long enough for us to find them and be able to see them. Here's a low relief depiction of 2 people sitting. And here is one of the things from Egypt that I love the most. It is a painting of a garden. And you can see that they did not have perspective in their drawings, so there's no sense of realistic depth. This kind of looks like you're looking at a little pond from above, and you can see the birds and the fish in it are on their side in 2 dimensions, as well as the trees around the pond are in 2 dimensions on their side, and the person up here in the top right is also in 2 dimensions from a side view. And so the Egyptians did not have perspective in their art, but they had a good sense of layout and obviously an incredible sense of geometry from their architecture. So it's very interesting to look at all of their art and see that there is little to no sense of perspective. Here's a wall surfacing of gold and different blue semi-precious stones or minerals. In Egyptian clothing, linen was a majorly used fabric. That's for many reasons. It's made from spinning fibers from a plant called flax, and linen is very light and it's not very hot, and so it was very key to be used in Egypt. Animal fibers such as wool were considered impure and worn rarely. The Egyptians held animals in really high regard. Children under 6 often wore nothing, and so did workers. This is something called a shenty. The shenty was just like the Mesopotamians. They started out with a very small skirt. Basically, if you make a piece of fabric and you just wrap it around yourself, you've invented the most basic form of clothing. In Egypt, the shanty started out very simple and became more elaborate as time went on and as technology got developed. The shanty became a variety of different skirts that were worn with different layers of pleating and patterning that were developed. Here's a series of Egyptians of various classes wearing different levels of clothing and different levels of complexity. And here's some more shanties, and also this woman is wearing a sheath dress. And the sheath dress was a popular dress for women. Everything in Egypt was made so that it would be light and cool. And the sheath dress could have been made out of linen, but it would be, a sheath is a fitted dress, often may have only consisted of open beadwork, and often started below the breast for women. So it would become just a really long, high skirt. But there were many various types. You can see on the lady on the left, if I can lean out of the way, the translucency kind of that's being alluded to in her, the way that she's drawn. And the one on the right is more of just a form-fitted strapped dress. This image on the right is one of the open beadwork images. And here's another one. And this sculpture as well is wearing sort of you don't know if it's a beadwork or if it's a fabric, but it's very fitted and seems to have a lot of elasticity to it. One of the most remarkable things about Egyptian imagery and paintings, here we see again, there's no perspective, but also they do something that we're going to talk a lot about when we get to medieval. They sized things based on their conception of their importance. And so you can see there are small people in this and small animal-headed gods that are unrealistically small. This green-dressed person is probably not a child, but a servant. And so they made the people who are more important bigger in their images. You see that a lot. Here's a more modern reproduction image of a variety of Egyptian clothing from a variety of time periods. The more high class you were, the more complex your garments would be, and the less you stayed out in the sun, the more likely it is that you might be wearing some layers at different times. The Egyptians wore wigs, so especially for the higher class people, many people shaved their heads. And if they were going to an event of some kind or basically any other kind of regular activity other than working or just being in the home, they would wear a wig. And these could be made out of horsehair or human hair if you were more high class. And they were elaborately decorated and covered in jewelry. Here we see a low-relief sculpture of something called the side lock. And this person has shaved all of their head except for one portion on the side that they grew out and braided. And this was called the side lock of youth. Often children would have just one section where they grew hair before they shaved all the rest of it off. Kohl. Kohl is an eye makeup that could be made out of charcoal or it could be made out of different minerals. Depending on what you could afford, would be what you got. But the Egyptians very commonly used heavy eyeliner and eyelid makeup. And it wasn't always black, but it was frequently very dark or black. Here's some more kohl. So images of this come up constantly, and makeup in general and wigs were very prominent, very popular. Here's, of course, King Tut's burial mask that strangely features blue a lot, and I don't know if it is known if that is a color that was ever worn or if it was just part of the jewelry quality of this mask. And the scarab. The scarab is our final Egyptian keyword, and the scarab was a type of beetle that was extremely prominent in Egyptian jewelry. You would see it over and over and over again, and if you watch something like Indiana Jones or any of the other popularized media of Egypt, you will see that it's given an almost mystical significance in a lot of media. But their other jewelry was incredibly elaborate, a lot of gold. They really treasured the color blue because throughout history it's been a really difficult color to obtain. There are very few minerals that you can make blue things out of. Lapis lazuli, which comes from one valley in Afghanistan, is one of the few things that is really blue and will hold its color. All the things in nature like feathers and things that might be blue, if you try to make a paint or pigment out of them, they'll typically fade. So all of these semi-precious stones and, pardon me, minerals that the Egyptians used, they were very, very precious to them, and they sent far and wide and mined for them to collect them to make all of their jewelry. A lot of animal imagery, a lot of birds and snakes they were all very important to the Egyptians. And in this blue ring here, you can see the eye of Ra, which Ra, the sun god, was their most important and powerful god. But a lot of their jewelry is really, really beautiful and things that we would consider to be incredibly nice today. The idea of their own story and the story of their pharaohs and their gods was worked into everything around them. They had an incredible presence and connectivity with themselves and their story. This is a headpiece made out of gold and inlaid semi-precious stones. Great. Here's our vocabulary words for Egyptians. And I will be posting this as a document as well. All of these documents will be in the files section of Canvas if they're not already there. Great. So thank you very much for being here with me in this lecture. Please reach out to me with any questions, and I look forward to talking with you again soon. Thank you very much.